July 29, 1981, 750 million people tuned in to watch Princess Diana marry Prince Charles. The world held its breath waiting to see her dress, and when she stepped out of that glass carriage, the gown was crushed, wrinkled, completely creased from the ride. Designer Elizabeth Emanuel watched the live broadcast and later admitted she felt faint. "I was horrified," she said. The dress that was supposed to be a fairy tale had turned into what critics would later call an unmade bed. But Diana's wrinkled taffeta disaster isn't the only royal wedding dress that missed the mark. From dresses that cost millions but looked cheap to gowns that overwhelmed the bride completely, some royal brides got it spectacularly wrong. We're counting down the 14 worst royal wedding dresses in history, and trust me, some of these will shock you. If you love diving into royal fashion secrets like this, I'd really appreciate if you'd subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring you more hidden stories from behind palace walls.
She was simply radiant. Beside her groom, Prince Albert.
All right, let's start with number 14, Princess Charlene of Monaco, 2011. The lead up to this wedding was dominated by scandal.
Charlene made a run for the airport, and that allegedly another woman is claiming to have a child out of wedlock with the prince.
Rumors swirled that Charlene had tried to leave Monaco multiple times after reports emerged that Prince Albert had fathered another child. Her passport was allegedly confiscated to ensure she attended. When Charlene walked down the aisle in her Armani privé gown, she was crying. But these weren't tears of joy. Throughout the entire ceremony, she looked absolutely miserable. Now, the dress itself was technically beautiful. Off-white silk duchesse encrusted with 40,000 Swarovski crystals and 20,000 mother-of-pearl teardrops. But here's where it becomes one of the worst. The sheer weight of all those crystals and pearls made the dress incredibly heavy. It physically weighed Charlene down, creating this haunting image of a bride burdened by her elaborate gown. Those teardrop crystals on the dress became unfortunate symbolism that many noted. The dress isn't remembered for its Armani craftsmanship or its beauty. It's remembered as the costume for one of the saddest royal weddings in modern history. Fashion is supposed to make you feel beautiful and confident. This dress did the exact opposite. Princess Märtha Louise of Norway, 2002. Most royal brides want to look like a soft, romantic fairy tale princess, but when the daughter of the King of Norway married author Ari Behn, she decided to ditch tradition entirely. She chose a two-piece ensemble by designer Venka Luka, and the result was, well, confusing. The dress featured a structured coat worn over a simple silk gown, but the real issue was that collar. It flared out behind her head in this massive, rigid arch that looked more like architecture than clothing. Instead of framing her face softly, the stiff collar loomed behind her head, giving the whole look a severe, almost Disney villain vibe, rather than blushing bride. And the silhouette? There was no flow, no movement. Because it was technically a coat, the fabric was heavy and stiff, creating these sharp, angular lines that hid her figure completely. For a royal wedding in a majestic cathedral, it felt less like haute couture and more like a costume from a sci-fi movie. It was definitely bold, but for all the wrong reasons. Princess Madeleine of Sweden, 2013. Valentino. That's the name everyone expected to deliver perfection. And when Princess Madeleine commissioned her wedding gown from the legendary designer, expectations were sky high. But something went terribly wrong with the execution. The dress was made from ivory silk organza with chantilly lace, which sounds gorgeous, right? But here's the problem. The lace looked yellowed against the stark white of the backing fabric. It aged the entire look. And then there's the fit. The bodice seemed like it couldn't decide whether to stay up or fall down. Those off-the-shoulder straps looked like they were constantly sliding off. Madeleine had to keep adjusting throughout the ceremony, which no bride should ever have to do. Fashion critics were merciless, pointing out that even with all that Valentino prestige and the massive price tag, the dress looked like it needed several more fittings. For a princess known for her elegant style, this was a shocking misstep. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, 1999. When Sophie Rhys-Jones married Prince Edward, she wore a dress that featured 325,000 hand-sewn beads. That's an incredible amount of work. The problem? You couldn't really tell. The beads were scattered randomly across hand-dyed silk organza, without any pattern or purpose. From a distance, the dress just looked vaguely shimmery. All those hours of labor, all that meticulous beading, and the effect was basically nothing. It didn't photograph well, it didn't create any visual interest. It was just there. And the overall silhouette? Very 90s, and not in a good way. Those shoulder pads, that stiff V-neck. It all felt dated even on the wedding day itself. Sophie is naturally elegant, but this dress made her look matronly rather than bridal. The long veil helped a bit, but it couldn't save a gown that was trying way too hard while achieving way too little. Princess Anne, 1973. Princess Anne has never cared what anyone thinks. And honestly, that's admirable, but her 1973 wedding dress to Captain Mark Phillips was a choice. Designed by Maureen Baker, the gown featured a high Tudor-style collar that was basically a turtleneck, medieval trumpet sleeves that flared over her hands, and pearl embellishments that tried to make it look regal. Instead, it looked like a costume from a historical drama. Critics compared it to Star Wars meets Henry VIII, and that's definitely not a compliment. The worst part? Anne has an amazing figure. She could have worn something sleek and modern that would have been absolutely stunning. Instead, she chose a design that covered every inch of her and made her look stiff and uncomfortable. The dress moves like armor in the photos. Yes, it was the 70s. Yes, fashion was experimental, but this particular experiment failed spectacularly. Queen Mary of Denmark, 2004. Mary Donaldson's transformation from Australian commoner to Danish crown princess was a modern fairy tale. Her wedding dress, designed by Uffe Frank, should have been magical. Instead, it sparked decades of debate about what went wrong. The fabric wrinkled badly throughout the ceremony. The seams down the front of the bodice puckered in a way that made it look like the dress was too tight. Mary appeared uncomfortable, like she couldn't breathe properly. And that train, it was attached in such a bizarre way, like a back brace that had been added as an afterthought. Fashion critics were harsh, and even everyday viewers could see something was off. The construction was poor. The fit was wrong. Mary is naturally elegant and has impeccable style now, but on her wedding day, the dress wore her instead of the other way around. It's the kind of gown that makes you wonder if there was time for proper fittings, or if something went terribly wrong at the last minute. Have you ever had a dress or outfit that looked perfect on the hanger, but completely wrong when you actually wore it? That's what happened here, except the whole world was watching. Princess Stéphanie of Monaco, 1995. Grace Kelly's daughter Stéphanie was known as the wild child of Monaco. She was marrying her former bodyguard, Daniel Ducrouet, with whom she already had 2 children out of wedlock. The palace reluctantly approved, and Stéphanie made it very clear she wasn't playing by royal rules. She showed up in a white lace mini dress, not knee-length, not T-length, mini, no veil, no train, no tiara. It looked more like something you'd wear to a cocktail party than a royal wedding. Now, some people loved the rebellion, but traditionalists were horrified. This was seen as disrespectful to her mother's memory. Grace Kelly wore one of the most iconic wedding gowns in history, and here was her daughter in what looked like ready-to-wear fashion from a department store. The marriage lasted less than 2 years before Ducrouet was caught in a scandal with a nightclub dancer. Looking back, the short, informal dress seems almost prophetic of how quickly and badly the whole thing would fall apart. Queen Letizia of Spain, 2004. This dress is reportedly one of the most expensive royal wedding dresses ever made, with estimates in the hundreds of thousands of pounds. Designed by 86-year-old couturier Manuel Pertegaz. It was made of Valencia silk with real gold thread woven throughout. So why is it on the worst list? Because spending that much money doesn't automatically make something beautiful. The high-standing collar was stiff and severe, making Letizia look uncomfortable. The dress was so structured and heavy that critics said it was wearing her, not the other way around. For someone as petite as Letizia, the sheer volume of fabric and the weight of the gold embroidery overwhelmed her frame. And here's the really unfortunate part. During the ceremony, it started pouring rain. The hem of this incredibly expensive dress absorbed water and dirt from the red carpet, turning the priceless gold-threaded silk into a heavy, muddy burden. All that money, all that craftsmanship, and the lasting image is of a bride struggling under the weight of an overly expensive, poorly conceived gown. Princess Mabel, 2004. When Prince Friso gave up his place in line to the throne to marry Mabel Wisse-Smith, the couple decided to make a statement with her dress. And girl, did they make a statement? Designed by Dutch avant-garde duo Victor and Rolf, the white satin gown was covered in 248 handmade bows. Yes, you heard that right. 248 bows. They started small at the bodice and got progressively larger as they cascaded down the skirt and train. It took 600 hours to create, and when Mabel walked down the aisle, people's jaws dropped. Not in a good way. Critics called it bizarre and compared the bride to a gift-wrapped package. Some said she looked like a clown. Others simply couldn't believe this was a real wedding dress and not some kind of art installation. Years later, after Prince Friso tragically passed away, Mabel wore a black Victor and Rolf dress with a single white bow to an event, referencing her wedding dress. That moment gave the gown new meaning, a symbol of enduring love and grief. But on the actual wedding day, it was overwhelmingly, undeniably too much. Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, 1986. The 1980s were peak excess in fashion, and Sarah Ferguson's wedding dress took that excess and ran with it. Designed by Linka Sirach, the Ivory Duchess satin gown featured massive padded shoulders, a 17-foot train, and embroidery that told an entire story. There were hearts for romance, anchors and waves for Prince Andrew's naval career, thistles for Scotland, and bumblebees from the Ferguson family crest. The couple's initials were sewn in silver beads on the train. It was literally a scrapbook you could wear. Critics were brutal. They called it garish, tacky, and tasteless. The symbolism was so literal and over the top that fashion editors couldn't take it seriously. And here's something that makes it even worse. Sarah originally wanted teddy bears and helicopters embroidered on the dress too. The designer had to firmly say no to prevent total disaster. The dress contributed to cruel tabloid nicknames criticizing her appearance, with critics saying the heavy satin and cluttered embellishments were unflattering. It was the last gasp of 80s princess aesthetic before the 90s brought in minimalism. And looking back, it's easy to see why that shift needed to happen. Queen Silvia of Sweden, 1976. When Silvia Sommerlath married King Carl Gustaf of Sweden in 1976, this was a major event. The king had only been on the throne for 3 years, and everyone was watching. The dress itself? Well, it's very 1970s. We'll give her that. But here's where it gets embarrassing. Look closely at Silvia's right wrist in the photos. See that little white thing peeking out? That's a tissue, and it's being held to her wrist by a brown rubber band. A rubber band at a royal wedding. Now, I'm not here to bash a bride for being prepared, but couldn't the king have put a handkerchief in one of his pockets? Or at the very least, couldn't she have put it on the wrist holding the bouquet where nobody would see it? It's such a small detail, but when you're marrying a king in front of the entire nation, these things matter. The dress had typical 70s styling issues, bunched up veil, wilting bouquet, but that rubber band, that's what people remember. Princess Marie-Chantal of Greece, 1995. When billionaire heiress Marie-Chantal Miller married Crown Prince Pavlos of Greece, money was clearly no object. She commissioned Valentino to create her gown, which reportedly cost $225,000. The wedding itself cost over $8 million total. It was the ultimate display of wealth marrying royalty. But here's the thing, spending a fortune doesn't guarantee taste. The dress was made of ivory silk with 12 different types of lace. It featured a high turtleneck, long lace sleeves, and a heavily structured bodice. The overall effect? Critics said it looked like expensive upholstery or a lampshade. The density of the lace and the stiff construction made it look more like furniture covering than a wedding gown. The turtleneck was particularly puzzling for a late spring wedding, and those sheer sleeves with what looked like craft pom-poms glued all over them, fashion critics couldn't believe this was what $250,000 bought. It was heavy, unflattering, and completely lacking in romance or elegance. Money can't buy style, and this dress proved it. Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, 2018. Okay, this is going to be controversial, but hear me out. When Meghan Markle walked down the aisle at Windsor Castle, the world had been waiting to see what a former Hollywood actress would choose. The Givenchy gown designed by Claire Waite Keller was minimalist and modern, and it sparked the biggest fashion debate in recent royal history. The problem wasn't the design concept. The problem was the fit, the double-bonded silk Katie fabric bunched at the arms and waist. The bodice looked loose in some photos, almost baggy. For a custom couture gown that reportedly cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, it looked unfinished, like the fittings hadn't been completed. Social media exploded. Reddit threads are still arguing about this years later. Some people insist it was a deliberate, relaxed fit. That's what the designer called it. Others say that's just a polite way of saying it didn't fit properly. The thick fabric didn't drape the way it should have. The sleeves wrinkled. And for someone who spent years on red carpets wearing perfectly fitted designer gowns, this was shocking. The 16-foot veil was beautiful, embroidered with flowers from all 53 Commonwealth countries. But even that got mocked online. People compared it to a CVS receipt because of its length. Look, Meghan is stunning. But this dress, it divided the world and remains one of the most debated royal wedding gowns in history. Princess Diana, 1981. We've come full circle. 750 million people watched this wedding, and Princess Diana's dress became the most copied gown in history. Brides everywhere wanted those puffy sleeves, that long train, that fairy tale romance. But here's what nobody wants to admit. The dress was a disaster. Designers David and Elizabeth Emanuel created a gown made of ivory silk taffeta with a record-breaking 25-foot train. It was embellished with 10,000 pearls and sequins. It was pure 1980s excess. and it completely overwhelmed the 20-year-old bride. The silk taffeta was the fatal mistake. When Diana traveled in the small glass carriage to St. Paul's Cathedral, the fabric crushed instantly. She arrived at the altar with deep, stubborn wrinkles all over the skirt and train. Elizabeth Emanuel later admitted she wanted to faint watching the live broadcast. The dress looked like Diana had slept in it, but it gets worse. The designers made last-minute alterations to the bodice, ultimately sewing her into the dress the morning of the ceremony. She accidentally spilled perfume down the front and had to clutch the fabric to hide the stain. The massive puffed sleeves made her look like she was being consumed by the dress. Critics later called it a meringue, a duvet, and said it looked like she was playing dress-up. Diana's dress defined bridal fashion for a decade, but looking back with clear eyes, it was technically flawed, aesthetically overwhelming, and a perfect metaphor for her tragic story. A young woman crushed by the weight of expectations and trapped inside a fairy tale that was falling apart before she even reached the altar. From rubber bands at royal weddings to dresses that cost millions but looked like upholstery, from miniskirts that shocked the monarchy to gowns so heavy they made brides cry. These 14 dresses prove that even royalty gets it wrong sometimes, and when they do, the whole world is watching. Here's what I want to know. Which dress shocked you the most? Diana's wrinkled taffeta, Mabel's 248 bows, or maybe Meghan's fit debate that's still raging online? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I love hearing your takes on royal fashion. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into royal wedding disasters, there are so many more stories to uncover. From tiaras with cursed histories to the secret messages royals send through their clothes. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring the fascinating, sometimes messy world behind palace walls. Thanks for watching. And remember, even with unlimited budgets and the world's best designers, sometimes the dress just doesn't work. And that's okay. Even princesses are human.